Now, I believe with this, I have covered every single servant on the rotating different servant banner for the New Year's over on the NA version of the game, and what a better servant to leave off on than my favorite Fate character, the boy, the homie, the king of Uruk, the king of heroes, Mr. Gilgamesh, alright? I saved the best for last, and really not the best for last, but you guys know what I'm saying. I gotta hype up my boy. In all reality, Gilgamesh is in a very weird spot because as he is right now, he's literally just a really basic DPS archer. He doesn't do anything super crazy, unique, and special, but if they change a lot about him or they give him different buffs, he's gonna be absolutely broken because he's one of those servants that just does a lot of the basic things really well. Like, he's got a really good attack buff, he's got good NP gain abilities, he has a solid battery, and a very good damage mod. Everything there is just really good, but it's not quite top tier yet. You know, he's not really hitting that S tier level that a lot of the other more modern servants are hitting. But the problem with Gilgamesh is that because he has so many just generically good things going for him, from hits to skills, if you implement new stuff onto those skills, he's going to become insanely broken. And I mean, we've seen that recently with characters like Ozymandias or Shiro Amakusa, who are like these really old servants that were kind of starting to fall off. And then DW comes along, gives them a few buffs here and there, and then boom, they are like insane meta top tier servants. And the same thing can happen to Gilgamesh. And honestly, is anybody going to be mad if the King of Heroes is the best character in the game or just one of the best characters in the game? I don't really think so. Some would say it's probably mandatory to have the person you call the strongest heroic spirit be the strongest character in the game. But you know, that might just be a little bit of copium that I'm snorting right now. But I do legitimately hope that they do help him out, because in today's video we're going to be talking about Gilgamesh and how good he is and whether or not you should be summoning for him or not. Before we begin, if you have not already, consider giving this video a like and dropping a subscribe on the channel, as it does greatly help the channel out a lot, and it is absolutely free to do so. If you want another free way to go ahead and support the channel, then down in the description down below, I am affiliated by all means with LD Emulator and Loot Cakes. And no, if you put your account on an emulator, you will not get your account banned, because Delightworks seems to be pretty nice, at least nicer than other companies, about having your accounts on an emulator. So if you ever wanted to play like JP or get a second NA account, you can always do that. Do keep in mind though that it is an Android emulator, so if you're transferring from Apple OS, you might have a few problems there with Saint Court, so just be careful about that. Then finally, if you're absolutely starving for extra content, not only can you come to the Twitch where I stream every weekday, and I've been loving seeing more and more of you guys come over to the Twitch, but you can also click that join button to become a channel member, where you get access to channel member exclusive content. But enough of the standard .YouTuber intro. Let's go ahead and get right into Gilgamesh, starting off with his hits, which this is actually something that he's quite notorious for. Gilgamesh is pretty well known for having probably the strongest deck in the entire game, because they literally just hit this man with 5 hits across the board and probably the most broken extra attack in the entire game with 8 hits on it. If there was ever a character that you were going to buff their append skill to get that 50% increase to the extra attack, Gilgamesh is definitely your guy. Because I mean, I only say it in every video, but the extra attack is a composite card that gen stars NP and does big boy damage, and when you got one with 8 hits on it, brother, you better make sure you are having that thing run at maximum efficiency. Now, the only problem, and the reason I do say you probably do want to go ahead and hit that append skill, is that his natural stats, to kind of balance out with his naturally high hits, are a bit on the lower side, with 0.34% NP gain and 7.9% star gen. Now, that's really not a problem for his arts cards, because you're probably going to be getting a lot of crits, because not only is he an archer who has very high natural star weight, and not only is he a buster servant who love to excel in creating crit stars, especially with one of their main support type servants being Merlin, but also just on the merit of him having 5 hits on everything, means that a Gilgamesh Brave Chain can actually drop a decent bit of stars. So in reality, your first couple of turns with Gilgamesh might be a little slow, but once you start getting those crits going, once you start getting some Brave Chains, you know, maybe Merlin's NP pops a couple of times, this guy's going to be looking absolutely ridiculous. Unfortunately though, outside of his NP, the skills that we're about to go over are all like really simple, like even really simple for even some of the year 1 servants. So we'll just go ahead and get into this, starting off with skill 1. It is a 21% attack buff for Brace Yourself the entire party. It lasts for 3 turns and is on a 5-turn cooldown. Now, I know I just kind of gassed that up and made it sound really impressive, but it's literally just a strong charisma. Although, unlike other charismas in the game where maybe you have someone like Quetzalcoatl's charisma where she also drops 30 stars, or Iskandar's charisma where he gives the entire party crit damage as well, Gilgamesh really isn't doing anything else. He's just giving you a really big attack buff for the entire party. Now granted, this is very just generically good, because it means no matter what Gilgamesh does, he's going to be getting a solid damage buff for all of that, but it's a little lackluster because in the current era, having a skill that only has one effect is a little lackluster, because you have other servants that, again, like I've mentioned, are doing other things with their charisma where they give the entire party an attack buff, but then they do something else on top of that as well, and it just makes it a little lackluster. Now, what I'm personally hoping for in this skill is that they slap on some crit damage, whether it be 50% crit damage for just Gilgamesh for 3 turns, or if it's like a 30% party-wide crit buff for the entire party for 3 turns. I don't really care what they do. Honestly, even the 30% to the entire party would be fine because he does have a passive 11% crit buff because he's an archer. So even if he gave the entire party 30% crit damage, he would technically have 41% crit damage with his passive skill, and that would be absolutely fine. So really the most I can hope for here is just they give him some crit damage so his face cards just bite a little bit more. Then we move on to his second skill, which, again, very basic. He's just giving himself 50% NP gen for 3 turns on a 6-turn cooldown. This is essentially supposed to really help out his arts cards, which it really does do, because if you're not getting crits, even though he has 5 hits on the arts cards, with 0.34% NP gain, if you're not critting, you're not genning any type of NP at all. But with him giving himself this 50% buff, which is insanely massive, so many arts and quick servants would kill to have an NP gain buff that big. But because he has this skill, it essentially really helps out his arts cards. And it's like, okay, you're not getting crits, but you're still at least getting a decent bit of notable NP back every time you use the arts cards, and it makes him function a lot better than when this skill is down. What I would like to see from this skill is maybe an additional 20% battery alongside the 50% NP generation. I would also like to maybe see this be an NP generation skill and a star gen skill, maybe it be like 50% for both. Because then Gilgamesh almost becomes like the ultimate Buster Star Gen servant, because then both his quick and Buster cards are going to function as basically Star Genning cards, and it's going to make him absolutely insane and kind of help his kit out completely, because then he'll be very self-sufficient by genning his own stars. And he doesn't really need the 20% battery because, spoiler alert, he can already kind of make himself a fake 50% battery within a pen skill. But I also think something interesting to note would also be something like Tamamovitch's skill, where like whenever she attacks with her Buster card, she refunds a certain amount of NP. I think something like that on Gilgamesh could be really good. And so hopefully something along those lines is slapped onto this skill. Then we have the third skill, which this one has already actually been buffed. It's basically just big star weight to just guarantee that Gilgamesh gets the stars. It's not quite as massive as someone like Jalters or someone like that, because he doesn't really need like insanely massive 4,000 star weight because he's already an archer, and his natural star weight is pretty much going to help him out a lot. This is really just to help him when he's next to people like Merlin, you know, casters that also have really high natural star weight, or maybe there's a rider around him. You know, it's supposed to help him steal those stars from other people that also have naturally high star weight, so it's kind of a nice thing to have. But then they also threw him the 30% battery, which with a 20% pen skill does mean he basically has a fake 50% battery, which does allow him to be very good with 50% starting charge CEs, and it lets him be very good in the Koyenskaya meta, although he has to be a little gimped for that because obviously servants that have the natural 50% battery that you can just kind of spam with Koyenskaya is a bit better. But if he's all you got for AoE Buster Archers, he can definitely get the job done with his fake battery. So with that being said, if you look at all the skills, like I'm saying, none of them are really bad. They all give him really good things that contribute to his kit. Just basic generic damage, very good NP gain to kind of fix up his problems with his arts cards, and then an immediate battery followed by star weight to help him be a bit more consistent as a crit servant, but nothing here is really super insane. And it's really only when we get to the NP that you kind of see why Gilgamesh is still held in very high regard, because his NP is really strong. Firstly, it gives him a 30% NP damage buff for the turn that procs first, and keep in mind that 30% NP damage buff is multiplying into his attack buff, so that is part of the reason why he does hit so hard, because he has a very solid 21% attack buff going into the 30% NP damage buff, because if you didn't know, different buff types in FGO actually don't add into each other, they multiply into each other. Now, if these were two attack buffs, those add into each other, because they're the same buff type, but this being an NP damage buff, and his skill 1 being an attack buff means they multiply, so it gives him a lot of damage. But he also has his overcharge multiplying into that as well, because that's a special damage mod, and this is the reason Gilgamesh is even remotely relevant. He has probably one of the best damage mods in the entire game. He deals extra damage to all servants except Enuma Elish nullification servants, which, if you look at the list of servants that are immune to Enuma Elish, it's really not a whole lot of them. I think there's like 20 or something of them in the game that don't take bonus damage from Gilgamesh, so suffice to say, you can pretty much bring him to any fight with the servant, whether it be wave 3 in a farming node, whether it be some random boss battle, and he will probably just go absolutely Hamtaro on them and just completely obliterate them. But even outside of that, his base damage is still really good even without the special damage mod. It's just kind of like he becomes a single target servant as soon as he does get the special damage mod, but even without it, his damage is still quite respectable, and that's why people do get a lot of use out of Gilgamesh. Now, is he worth summoning for? He's kind of one of those servants like, say, Saber Shiki, right? Someone that I think you can definitely get a lot of use out of, although Gilgamesh definitely you can get more use out of than Saber Shiki, but he's one of those servants that I definitely recommend people just kind of watch over and keep an eye on them, because he's not quite super broken yet, but if you look at the stuff that he does have, and you look at how much damage he's already doing right now, he's in position to really just be one of the best servants in the game if they just throw a couple buffs his way. And I really don't know why they're kind of just holding off on giving him said buffs, because again, he's like one of the most popular servants in the game, and in the game they call him like the strongest servant, he's the king of heroes, all this cool stuff. But then they just don't ever buff him. I mean, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, imagine if you had a Dragon Ball game where you had this, like, Beerus or Broly unit that was really good in year 1 and is still kind of solid after a couple of years in the game's life cycle, but they just never touched them ever again. Didn't even make a new Broly or Beerus unit. Maybe they make, like, a little offshoot one like Caskill is, but they really don't ever retouch them. It's just kind of odd, you know? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I don't know, here's to hoping that they go back and they rebuff him a little bit, because Gilgamesh could definitely use it, and it's really not all that hard to give him buffs that don't absolutely break the character. I think the things that I suggested are very healthy buffs that you can give to him that make him significantly better, but they don't completely break the character. So we'll have to see how these things do shape up in the future. Let me know your thoughts on his buffs that he could get in the comments down below. And here's to hoping, I don't know, maybe 2022, maybe this is the year that Gilgamesh finally gets some buffs. But with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace late, guys.